Hello, welcome to my first solo event. This is my senior art exhibition, Ode to Self. And I would like to start by saying that as a studio art major and a neuroscience minor, I have been able to incorporate those two pools of thought together and to create works that address neuroscience as the focal point of my artistic process and creation. And so I would like to start talking about this first piece. Last year, with the start of the pandemic, as I was typing in Korean to my parents and kind of reconnecting with whatever Koreanness that was inside of me, I realized that by writing to my parents and writing those letters and reconnecting with perhaps my ethnic history and my actual lineage, I was missing that a lot. And so I then tried to literally combine those elements together. These gestures were already present in my other drawings, but I kind of began to intentionally incorporate the Korean letters, the Korean alphabet Hangul, and as well as the neuronal structures, the visual images, the exposure I had through neuroscience courses, whether here in Davidson or study abroad, as well as the other kind of abstract gestures and expressions that came through from my other classes. And as they were taking more concrete forms and compositions, I was then kind of collapsing them together, creating, as we say, order within the chaos. And here, this piece specifically, it means a lot to me because, at first glance, maybe you don't see a lot of layers, but in reality, underneath the thicker layers of acrylic on the very top, the watercolor layers are about 30 to 40 brush strokes. So each time I'm repeating the letters 누구니, which means who are you or who is that, I began to ask myself that very question over and over, and that process has been very important to me. And as my instinctive gestures come along, I decided to incorporate other forms that have always been present in my work. So I kind of realized that they came to me instead of me chasing after them. And so it's been a very meaningful year for me to be able to know that I am finally comfortable with the gestures that I've always worked with so far. And all the materials that I have always thought were a part of me, whether it was because they reminded me of skin or because they reminded me of brain cells, neurons. It meant a lot to me in the sense that whether it's this epidermal layer, the skin, a protective barrier that is protecting me from the unknown, I was still able to define myself and define what my identity could possibly mean through these Korean alphabet and letters that I'm still, I'm still a beginner in the Korean language. I'd like to continue the narrative of skin, the narrative of the barrier and its protectiveness, because this sculpture for me, I think I consider it more pretty than threatening, as a lot of people might, say. And the reason why is because I see myself in this, these spikes and these spires, they might seem like they want to stab you. And yes, I might have had many unfortunate events where I did injure myself making this sculpture, but that says a lot, that reveals a lot about how I wanted to protect myself while moving across the different countries, trying to adapt to newer environments every 2 or 3 years. It's always been my parents and me, just the three of us against the world, traveling around and living in different communities, me going to different schools. It's been very difficult. And so I think I always had this outer layer, this skin. I needed to create this thick skin for myself in order to survive. And so I thought by repeating these forms of plantation, whether they are growing, mutating, dying, or maybe even absorbing the environmental qualities that is happening around each other, I thought maybe that can speak to myself. And I kind of regard this as my self-portrait in that sense, but through these arboreal structures that still are reminiscent of neuronal extensions and neuronal networks. And these individual branches were actually taken from drawings, adaptations of drawings of the brain cells. And so tweaking them in this manner for me is to say that I can still claim my identity within the governing laws of neuroscience and the sciences. And with that, I would like to move on to the final piece I'd like to talk about, which has actually, this is the oldest piece in this collection of works. It is, yes, it is a giant brain, but for me, these negative spaces that you see here, they could mean broken mirror shards, they could mean fluttering butterflies, the migrating monarch butterflies that just happen to kind of follow me everywhere that I go. And through that migration and through my adaptation and through that kind of that conceptual thought, that is how I was able to complete this piece. And that is why, you know, I never regard this as just a brain, but maybe the organs, the heart, two faces, two people coming together, the neuronal networks that are strengthened by the welding points and the connection points. That is literally how the brain is developed and constructed. Those are the many thoughts that I kind of harbored within the sculpture. And then I began to expand out to making other pieces that specifically, you know, started to elaborate and develop more on those ideas. So this was a nice beginning to, and a nice introduction to like other works that I've created so far. And that is the overview of this exhibition. And I would love to move on to questions and even going into further details about pieces that you would like to talk about or to hear about.
Could you maybe talk about that gigantic drawing to your right, which I have not seen before? Yep.
Gigantic, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that one.
So this actually has a story of its own, which is why I wanted to skip. It has its own independent narrative, let's say. So I actually created this piece last summer. So it was the summer right after, you know, a very mysterious semester, I would say. And I actually was able to reclaim the grant that was supposed to allow me to travel internationally to France. But fortunately, I was able to still have the grant so that I would be able to purchase materials and stay here and safe in Charlotte. And it was a collage piece, and it reflected a lot of how I was feeling last year. I would dare say that I feel pretty much the same now with the pandemic still, but you know, still here, for example, this says virus in Korean, you can barely see here, but I felt like by incorporating Hangul, the Korean letters, it felt like I was sort of reaching out to my home country in that way. But this was originally a collage. This has been vectorized and pulled into Adobe Illustrator, printed onto canvas paper. But it's nice to see how those three-dimensional qualities still translate onto this two-dimensional platform. And this was antecedent to the other piece I talked about in the very beginning. But yeah, I think this was very much experimental. And the same materials I used here are present across all the other two-dimensional works as well. Just to say that I knew what worked for me and I knew what spoke to me.
I could jump in. I'm somewhat interested in the fact that we are in this virtual platform, and I'm really aware of the amount of layers that go into your work, the thickness of medium, and how it intertwines, especially in your drawings and collages, paintings, and even in images that eventually get kind of flattened. It's very interesting in this way. I've never viewed your work from a screen before, in this kind of a formal setting. And so I'm really taken with how the work presents itself, but I'm so missing for everyone the quality of texture that's embedded into it. And so I definitely would love for everyone to take advantage of seeing this show in person. But I'm just curious, for you, Adrienne, what was it like to put this exhibition together?
I was pretty set on, what I would be saying. I've repeated myself many times now in front of friends, professors, and whatnot. But I knew that more than anything, this exhibition was going to pertain to a very specific theme and a very specific idea, and the threading of ideas, shown through different pieces. And I only wanted 3 pieces in the show. I ended up having 6. But those decisions came along as I was working with the space of the gallery. So it's been very, this has been a great lesson for me too, as I will move on as an actual practicing artist and doing other shows, solo or group shows, to know that, yes, I know what I want to say, but if it makes more sense for the space, and maybe perhaps other works that would kind of support the conceptual thought of the main pieces, then I should allow myself to show more and allow myself to show, even the pieces that are not necessarily strong, but still very, it still shares the same narrative, and it's still under the same family in that manner. But I feel pretty good. I think, I surprised myself, I think, the way how this all came together. But I think, as I was making these works, and for example, the garden piece, which is very line wide, I think kind of unconsciously, maybe I was even thinking about this gallery space and how it was going to play out eventually. Not that, that was always in my mind, but I think that was one of the influences in my studio.
Shaw Smith here. If I may ask I think it's a question. Was there ever a moment, hear me out, was there ever a moment when you were drawing or creating a metal piece about your brain, when you're realizing that what you're creating is what you're using at the same time to create that object? That seems to me that would be a very interesting kind of space to be in, that you have a kind of area where what you're creating is actually something you're using to make that creation. Could you speak to that if you had a moment of I don't want to use the word weird, but it must be a global moment almost.
Yeah, I think that's also I think that goes along the lines of, I've had a lot of people ask me, like, how did you do that? How do you make the next decision to, make the next steel plate, put something here or something there? And I think your question actually is quite similar to those questions as well, because I would say I feel like I'm drawing in the air. That's what I always say. And yes, that's kind of hard to, wrap your mind around with IED, especially because, you're working with steel. It is malleable, steel is malleable, but it is still, it's really hard to work with, and the process is very, physically demanding, etc. But I think I just accepted that. I accepted its personality, and once I did, I think it was very easy for me then to move on to just creating the forms and think about how it was coming together, like drawing in the air. And maybe if you, I guess, like sci-fi movies or high-tech stuff, when you see people like drawing in the air and doing all that cool stuff, that is how I think about it. And so I actually didn't give that too much of a thought. I think it came to me quite naturally. So yeah, steel means a lot to me. Hopefully I'll be able to find the right facilities and places where I can continue to do my steel work, because I did not realize that this would be so easy as a charcoal drawing, charcoal, streaks on paper. So about the process first, so the actual collage, the colors are more saturated, more muted, kind of quite similar to the other pieces. But the process was actually image tracing on Illustrator and to be able to vectorize it, right? And image tracing, funnily enough, that's also the same process that that I have to go through for the steel pieces, because I would actually draw on paper, bring it to Illustrator, do the image tracing, bring it to software that allows me to print on steel. It's a fire laser that cuts through steel with the right point, XY points. So anyway, it's the same process, and I think I was just kind of subconsciously just going for that image trace button. And it was just totally experimental in that sense too. And this happened quite last minute, and it was a nice surprise. And I actually took digital art course just last semester. So digital art is very new to me. These have been all very traditional methods, as you can kind of tell. And so I was kind of drawn into this new way of making art. And the reason why I like the colors and the reason why I allowed this to be neon-like is because I simply think that balances out this show. And I think I was thinking more about the kind of cohesiveness of this body of work rather than just this piece. But I think it works for this piece as well. So, it was a good decision, I think. So let's start with the lace part here. That's the same lace paper I've used in other works. And I was only using, charcoal, graphite, pastel, and charcoal, this charcoal dust mixed with alcohol, and using that as my pigment and as a like watercolor almost. And it's just how I've always been this way. I've always been expressive in this manner. And then the Korean alphabet started kind of mingling with those forms. And this was, I think, one of the first discoveries, one of those first aha moments where I said, yeah, I will accept what is happening here. And acceptance is very important for me because, once you accept it, it's very, then it's easier to decide whether or not you will allow it to appear in future works. And so that was quite meaningful for me in that sense. This has been very surreal. I've always, since, obviously as I was building this show, I was thinking back to the good old times when I was a first year, and I was very proud of myself knowing that I went to every single shows that happened until now. And I always kind of dreamed of this day, and the past me was always curious about my future me, about what I would possibly do in Davidson. And back then, I still wasn't sure how exactly neuroscience was going to play out as a focus in my artistic process or art or anything. But with these kind of unprecedented times with COVID, I'm glad that still I was able to find that anchor and still be able to kind of delineate that process and my own voice in that way. So yeah, this feels as much of a closure as it's the beginning and commencement, as we say. That's a little cheesy. But yeah, I am glad that I am leaving Davidson with great satisfaction and great fulfillment. And I'm very happy with everything that I've done. I'm very grateful for everyone that's helped me so far. Everyone in the Visual Arts Center, of course, and across other departments. That includes the psychology and neuroscience departments as well. You know who you are. You've always been there for me. And no matter how little or big advice that was, or the little or big time that we've shared together, it's been an incredible time. And so thank you all for that. And my thank you is kind of reflective in here. So yeah, I think that is all.
See you, crowd.
Oh yeah, thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.